Alright, today I'm going to talk to you about the shocking news from Stellantis. Western car companies are facing a total wipeout. Also, after Trump gained benefits in the Middle East, he placed the biggest diplomatic gamble, with the US putting all its chips on backing a radical leader. Will they win? Middle Eastern countries really know how to cater to others' preferences. Recently, during the trip to the Middle East, there were grand red carpets, camel tours, gifts of airplanes, and a flood of massive shopping deals. After Trump finished his visit, he felt like he had hit the jackpot. Hey, on Air Force One, he boasted to reporters about $10 trillion for the US. Although, no matter how everyone calculated, they just couldn't come up with that 10 trillion figure. The grand welcome from the Middle East for Trump at least helped to offset the tension from the US-China tariff negotiations. He was forced to make concessions to China, which was a humiliating blow. This week, Trump embarked on his first official overseas trip since taking office, visiting 3 Middle Eastern countries: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. So, along the way, he also met with Syria's new radical leader, Salah, in Saudi Arabia, but did not visit Israel, a longtime US ally. Because Trump is already notorious for his domineering and overbearing style, the Middle Eastern countries went out of their way to curry favor with him. The major power Saudi Arabia, with its abundant financial resources, spent a huge sum directly. During Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, a massive $142 billion US arms deal was signed. The White House claimed this was the largest defense contract in US history. It involved 10 American military-industrial companies. And Saudi Arabia agreed to invest $600 billion in the United States. Although Trump personally demanded an even larger investment of $1 trillion, that figure was not reached. Still, even with just hundreds of billions in investment, Saudi Arabia is truly impressive when it comes to spending money. There was never an exact figure anyway. But during Trump's last term, Saudi Arabia only agreed to invest a little over $300 billion in the US. And in the end, no one really cared how much was actually invested. Their financial strength isn't as great as Qatar's, which simply ignored Trump altogether even before Trump visited Qatar. They even planned to gift a Boeing 747-8 aircraft, which would become the new Air Force One for the US president, and claimed that it could continue to be used even after Trump left office. Now, this sparked huge controversy in the US, with direct accusations that Trump was accepting personal benefits. In addition, Qatar Airways placed an order with Boeing for 210 aircraft, with a total value as high as $96 billion. Qatar also went all out for Trump, and after the even poorer Syrian radical leader Shara came to power, today they are seeking for the US to lift sanctions. As for Shara, the best approach is to make it personal. He announced this in the Syrian capital, Damascus. He proposed building a Trump Tower as a way to ease relations with the United States. As a result, Trump, accompanied by Saudi Crown Prince Salman, met with Shara and praised him as a young, charismatic man with a brilliant past. Trump even announced the lifting of sanctions on Syria. Middle Eastern countries have adapted to Trump's transactional style by practicing checkbook diplomacy, and it has proven effective. In contrast, Biden has repeatedly criticized Saudi Arabia on human rights issues. This is because Jamal Khashoggi, a columnist for a Washington newspaper and an American resident, was dismembered inside the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Back in 2018, Biden once called Saudi Crown Prince Salman a pariah, so the relationship between Salman and Biden has been very poor. But when it comes to taking money, starting with Trump, Saudi Arabia not only never mentioned the Khashoggi incident, but even went so far as to lavish praise on Salman. On the 13th of next week, in the luxurious conference hall of the Riyadh US-Saudi Investment Forum, Trump delivered a 40-minute speech. Right from the start, he went all out to praise Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, calling him an incredible figure. What drew even more attention was Trump's criticism of America's past interventionism. Trump admitted that the US used to act as so-called nation builders. As a result, the US ended up destroying more countries than it built, and he promised to put an end to nation building and interventionist actions that dictate how others should live. The New York Times commented that Trump's remarks were, in fact, a condemnation of several decades of US policy in the Middle East. On February 15th, CNN published an article pointing out that, behind a series of sensational news stories, the Trump administration seemed to have other plans in motion, and Trump's most important actions were often overshadowed by other hyped-up news. For example, while public debate in the US focused on whether it was legal for Carter to send a plane compared to Trump, there was relatively little attention paid to Trump's meeting with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And what about the announcement to lift sanctions on that country? This historic meeting between the American leader and the Syrian president, the first in 25 years, could become the biggest foreign policy move of Trump's second term. According to CNN, what's unusual is that this action by Trump has even won praise from some of his longtime critics. Even former CIA director and former Secretary of Defense Panetta said he believes this is a very good move, and he thinks Trump is right because this person, Salah, was able to lead a rebellion and overthrow Assad. Moreover, as far as is known, Salah has worked hard to bring stability, and Syria is facing a tough challenge. Reports say that Trump made the decision to lift sanctions under the urging of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Both countries hope to prevent the unrest in Syria from spreading. But now, people are saying that Trump is taking a risk. The president and the outside world see Salah as the greatest hope for stability. But there is growing concern that the government is not protecting religious and minority groups. Although Trump remains optimistic about Syria's future, if he wants to lead Syria towards stability by using American power to rally like-minded countries to support Syria, it will definitely not be easy. Now, looking at the Trump administration's foreign policy team, which is troubled by the chaotic arrangements of conservative figures and the lack of experience among some key personnel, there is no doubt that this is yet another major challenge. It seems the government is already running out of options, and things could end up in complete disarray. They are preemptively shifting the blame, repeatedly saying that one of the reasons for lifting sanctions on Syria is because of the lobbying by Saudi Crown Prince Salman. Trump said, "Oh, I've helped the Crown Prince a lot." Yes, it's obvious that in the past, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the Assad government in Syria was not good, not friendly at all. Saudi Arabia, just like Turkey, supported the armed opposition groups trying to overthrow the unfriendly Assad regime. Now, of course, Saudi Arabia strongly backs these groups. This combination seems to follow the logic that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's the same for the United States, but Trump needed money as a lubricant. However, this kind of alliance, where the partners have fundamentally different ideologies, is destined not to last long. In reality, the leader of these groups is a radical who just swapped out his yoga mat, and although he rejects Syrians in the early years, after Iraq, the Al-Qaeda branch in Iraq was supported by Al-Qaeda's founder, bin Laden. Al-Salaf was ordered to go to northern Syria to establish Al-Qaeda's Syrian branch, the Al-Nusra Front. When Baghdadi established ISIS under the name of the Islamic State, Al-Salaf directly announced that Al-Qaeda would confront Baghdadi head-on. But later, due to unstable relations with Al-Qaeda and to avoid being ordered to send troops to attack the enemy, Al-Salaf's group broke away. First, they changed their name to the Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, the Front for Conquest, and then they united with various other factions in the north. The heroes then re-established the Third Liberation Organization. The Third Liberation Organization was attacked in October 2024 in what was called an anti-invasion military operation. However, it's likely that even al-Salaf didn't expect the Syrian government forces to be so weak. President Assad, being cowardly, immediately fled, and within just 10 days, al-Salaf's forces reached the capital, Damascus. These people were, in fact, all sorts of terrorist organizations masquerading under different names. And their real intention was always to seize power and govern. Now that they've come to power and their position isn't yet secure, they want to curry favor with the United States, so they even went to visit Trump Tower, doing whatever it takes without hesitation. But once al-Salaf stabilizes its footing, that's when their true colors will show. Let's not forget that the Syrian Third Liberation Organization, led by Comrade Sarah, has been accused of having ties to terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and is still on the US terrorist list to this day. Someone said that there have been many similar cases in American history. Washington has placed its trust in strongman leaders in the Middle East, hoping they could hold together countries fractured by religious and tribal divisions, but in the end, this has resulted in the deaths of large numbers of American soldiers. To sum up, first, Trump is willing to agree to anything for money and power. He listens to whatever Saudi Arabia says. He buys into the gamble of making that leader of a terrorist organization in Syria a partner, which is completely senseless. Maybe one day I'll see Syrians tearing down Trump Tower and burning the American flag. But as long as things are good for now, who cares what happens to America tomorrow? Secondly, for China, if Syria sides with the US, China will have one less friend in the region. But what about Saudi Arabia? It's a major oil-producing country. They won't be able to break away because China is the biggest energy consumer and a major customer for oil-producing countries, as well as for rare earths. Even the US won't distance itself from China. In addition, if European and American car companies are feeling nervous, according to a report from the Financial Times on the 14th, at the FTA Future of the Car Summit held in London, a senior executive from Stellantis, the world's fourth largest automotive group, said he was shocked by the extent to which foreign car companies are losing market share in China. Stellantis was formed in 2021 through the merger of Italy's Fiat Chrysler and France's Peugeot Citroën, creating a giant automotive company. The Chief Operating Officer for Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa at Stellantis is Maxime Picard. He warned that as Chinese domestic car companies continue to close in on Germany's Volkswagen and Japan's Toyota, the last strongholds of foreign car makers in China, Western automotive brands may have no future left in China. Bu Gaosheng was first assigned to China in 2007, serving as the head of the Wuhan factory for the Sino-foreign joint venture Dongfeng Peugeot Citroën Automobile. In 2011, he was promoted to general manager of Dongfeng Peugeot Citroën, taking full charge of the joint venture's operations. In 2012, he was transferred to become CEO of the Peugeot brand under the PSA Group. He once worked in China for nearly 5 years, making him a heavyweight in the automotive industry who has been deeply involved in the Chinese market for many years. When asked whether European and American automotive groups can compete with local brands in China, he candidly said, "I'm an optimistic person, but in this matter, I really can't be optimistic, sorry to say." In fact, in the Chinese market, local brands are expanding their offensive across all vehicle segments, especially in the fields of electric vehicles and large cars, taking market share from foreign car companies. They are seizing a large share of the market. Although brands like Toyota and Volkswagen still maintain high sales in the mid-sized gasoline car market, he believes that the advantage Western car companies have in these last strongholds will not last long. And he is very shocked by this. If you look at the situation over the past few years, you'll see that the trend of declining market share is very clear. For Western automakers, it is now extremely difficult to maintain their position in China. According to Gravity's report, Volkswagen and Toyota are still the top two manufacturers in China's gasoline car market, together accounting for 34% of the market share. However, data from Shanghai consulting firm Automobility shows, in the first 2 months of this year, the market share of foreign brands in this segment has dropped to 30%. 2 to 5 years ago, that is, in 2022, BYD had already replaced Volkswagen as the top-selling brand in China. So, how is Volkswagen responding to the fierce competition in the Chinese market? So, German manufacturers are doubling down on China, their main long-term source of profit, by adopting a for China, in China strategy. At the end of last year, Volkswagen announced an additional investment of 2.5 billion euros in China. Perhaps it can be boldly concluded, automobile is the crown jewel of industry. Now, China is directly seizing the throne from automotive powerhouses like Japan and Germany. Judging from the response of Stellantis' top executives, it's clear that the era of European and Japanese car companies is over. This has led to a complete shake-up in China's electric vehicle market. Nowadays, if the market share of fuel vehicles is overtaken by Chinese plug-in hybrid vehicles and China becomes number 2, it would mean that there is an industry where domestic players have defeated foreign competitors if it comes to the automotive sector.
And with the core automotive sector now conquered, the tipping point has arrived.